All right, we are live from the Barstool office. Coach Doug's here with attorney based out of New York, Dan Lust. You worked for the Giants as a PR lawyer for a while. You now teach at NY Law School. Is that right?
New York Law School in Tribeca. They apparently lost my Giant Super Bowl ring in the mail, but I was there as a PR intern once upon a time. But I've been around the block make it a fun, we'll say side hustle of mine to comment on these particular stories to educate our sports fans here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you coming on. It's something, I was pre-law at Florida State, so I think I know a little bit about the law and certain, lawyerings and such. It's nice to have you here, and we're going to basically be talking about Dan Snyder, the Washington Commanders, and everything that's been going on with them. As a non-Commanders fan, I've kind of been, in the background. I've heard what's going on, but I'm not really too into the weeds as far as it. So I figured we just start out with that, what is he accused of been doing, or what has he been found to do? And then we can kind of branch out from there.
Yeah. I know you're a Jags fan, so you're obviously familiar with what happened with Urban Meyer. I'd say what went on with Snyder is like that, but times like 30. It's a lot. We make the show, this joke on our show that at a certain point, the Commanders are playing a form of sports law bingo. They're finding ways to get in trouble in every way, shape, or form, from a name changing level to we can talk about this type of Penn State institutional control allegations. Dan Snyder has his own sexual assault allegations. There's cooking the books allegations, like you name it, the Commanders have been accused of it. At a certain point, Dan is getting a nickname like Teflon Dan or like Cockroach Dan. Can't seem to kill the guy, but it seems like we're trending in a direction where all of a sudden we might see some history in sports law. Doug's, I'm sure we'll get into it, but never in the history of sports, baseball, basketball, football, hockey, our core four, has an owner been forced to sell. Not with Donald Sterling. There was some technicality on a probate case. Not with Marge Schott. Not with Jerry Richardson. But Snyder seems to be the first guy that seems to be testing the NFL rule books.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was on the commute here this morning with Frank, and I did a little bit of research, and it seems that there has been a lot of instances where owners have been pressured to sell, or other instances where, it's the easiest course of action for them is to sell. But you just confirmed it there. So no owner, basically through the court system, no owner has been forced out.
Yeah, I mean, we could get into it even now. If we want to draw an easy basketball comparison, Robert Sarver had a lot of issues about him, right? I think ESPN interviewed 70 different people claiming, misogynistic stuff, racist stuff, you go back, gender-based stuff. But Sarver, I think at a point in time, there were reports that he was going to put his foot down. He was going to fight this. And then, somehow or another, he just caved. Robert Sarver, the owner of the Sun, just said, I'm going to voluntarily sell the Suns and the Mercury. And he's going to go into greener pastures, probably cash in somewhere between $3 and $5 billion. So the question is, right, in this day and age, it is very odd for someone to be fighting to keep their team when there's a literal pot of gold waiting on the other end of this. If Dan Snyder didn't own a team, if he was one of any other executive of a Fortune 500 company, I'd like to say that our watchdogs would be out and going after the guy, but I would imagine to a much lesser extent. So it's a real oddity that someone like Snyder, right, who's not really famous for anything else other than owning a team, wants to put his feet in the ground and fight this when, there's billions of dollars in a major media market that's Washington, where, sports betting and then the combination with the arena could do very well. There's certainly no shortage of suitors for that franchise. So, yeah, it's never happened before, but certainly getting some inklings that there might be a vote that occurs. And not only that, might be enough votes to get him kicked out.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things where it's kind of like when you hear a court case going, it's if they do end up going that route, or, the owners vote them out, everything, obviously the easiest thing to do would be for him to, sell the team and it just goes away, and, you get a new owner and it's, it's all hunky dory. As someone who wants to get to the truth and I guess kind of enjoys the drama a little bit, I would like it to see it play out, just so that we can see it play out. When court cases get settled out of court and you're like, we're never going to know the truth. It's going to cost a lot of time and a lot of money, but if it actually did play out that way, I think it'd be very interesting to watch.
We'll go down a brief rabbit hole. I'm a professor at a law school, and I try to explain to my students, like, sometimes I know some of your Barstool friends, right? Like KFC puts on the tinfoil hat and Jersey Jerry does the signs. Sometimes you can kind of follow this, like, and how this decision tree, what the NFL did with respect to Snyder has changed a lot in a very short amount of time. I don't know how many we'll get into, but the NFL did an investigation of Snyder. They started it in July of 2020. It went on for a year. And at the end of the day, it left a lot of people with more questions than answers because they didn't release a written report. They fined Snyder $10 million, I think was the number. They told him to stay away from the team. But like, I know what he was accused of. I know what was accused of within the organization. I don't know what they pinned on Snyder because the NFL conveniently never issued a written report. With Deflategate back in the day, there was like 100 pages of report. The Mitchell report, you and I know well from the steroid era, hundreds of pages, but no report, nothing whatsoever with respect to the Commanders, which I find to be odd. And now since that's happened, the NFL has issued one report with respect to owner allegations. That's Stephen Ross over in Miami, who was accused of those bribery allegations stemming from the Brian Flores case. So interestingly, Doug's, our written report was issued there. Now let's go over to basketball, right? Those guys are not in the business of written reports either, but guess who gets a written report? Robert Sarver. So I think what the NFL's mistake is saying, yep, $10 million, we're going to fine Snyder. He's going to stay away from the team. His wife is going to take over duties. Don't worry about it. Yeah, just trust us. We did the right thing here. The fact that they were not transparent in their handling of that, I think, has created this groundswell of people. And I know PFT is obviously one of them, but this movement of like, this is the momentum. Let's figure out where the bodies are buried. What was the NFL hiding? And I think it ended up kind of biting them in the ass that they were not transparent in the initial instance. And now there's so much of a fight. The NFL now has to do a second kind of cleanup report to make up for the first. So I think, my background's in PR. I think this was mishandled. And I don't think the NFL could have quite predicted what would have happened as a result of it.
Let's just, quickly recap. So you mentioned already the first investigation. Let's just go over that. What happened there, or what was accused of, and then we can go into the second allegation as well.
Yeah, I'll try to do this as chronological as I can. So, in about 2 years ago at this point, the NFL launches an investigation, and it's really spawned by this outcry from former employees that there's this culture of a toxic workplace, and some of the allegations there were very messy, but in a very general sense, Snyder was not directly involved in those allegations. He was overseeing an operation similar like how Penn State happened with Joe Paterno at the top, that how couldn't the owner see what was going on beneath him? So I remember, there's different reports that, female employees would have to call Dan Snyder, like Mr. Snyder, and, they have to wear certain things. And, he was very odd about people looking him in the eye. And then there was these kind of troubling allegations with respect to, we call it in legal ranks, like voyeurism, but of a behind the scenes photo shoot of cheerleaders who allegedly didn't know they were being videotaped, and just really messy allegation, which is, I think, the one that picked up the most steam. But this videotape of behind the scenes cheerleader stuff was kind of put together, without their knowledge. And that video was created for Dan Snyder. Now, I've never heard, testimony with respect to whether Snyder watched it or not, but obviously the allegations out there that video was made for an illicit purpose within the organization. I've spoke to former employees who, swear to its existence, and, they're horrified by it. But certainly if that's happening with under the roof of an NFL franchise, in 2020, that's problematic and enough to spawn an NFL investigation. So that's really our first bucket. Former employees speaking out about an overarching, these allegations of a toxic workplace, a lot of things going wrong within the organization. The NFL should look into it. But for the most part, right, nothing directly tying Snyder to something where he should, in theory, be kicked out. But, maybe as an owner, right, you should be paying attention. That's our first bucket.
Negligence, maybe, like he should have known about it,
right,
even if he didn't.
Yeah, that's our first bucket. That's our first investigation. And, as I was just referencing, like, why was the NFL, fining Dan Snyder $10 million and making him stay away from the team for a period of time? And I guess trying to tell him to stay away from day-to-day stuff. We'll talk about if the Carson Wentz alleged trade is violative of that. But that was maybe the biggest question mark. What did the NFL found that he actually did wrong? If we go to Stephen Ross and those Miami Dolphins allegations, we know the NFL found that Stephen Ross didn't bribe Brian Flores, right? They didn't find that occurred, but they did find that he tampered with respect to, Tom Brady, and Sean Payton. That's what they found. So the NFL made a line of demarcation about what this allegation was and what they found was verified and what was not. We never got that level of transparency. So we don't know. Maybe the NFL found, right, for all we know, that Dan Snyder ordered that video to be produced to him. We don't know those answers. So yeah, we still don't know that. And we'll see if the second allegation ends up bearing that out.
Investigating all of that then led to the second investigation, which is cooking books.
There's probably a part in the middle, right?
Yeah,
this is Doug's. I'm not a political guy. By all means, sports are my politics, which I'm sure they are for you as well. Like, I didn't necessarily know if there was anything more to this, but I knew that there was a groundswell of this hashtag release the report. So I don't know, same reason why our politicians are involved in the NIL landscape, which I know you follow closely as a big college football guy. But the politicians started to hear this, right? And this is happening in our nation's capital. So obviously the politicians got word that something was happening on an NFL level. And if you're if you can have that great clip, and I remember during the congressional hearings, Portnoy came up for whatever reason, but
Jim.
Yeah, unclear why Barstool's coming up, but the politicians took this over, and they started issuing subpoenas to Snyder, to Bruce Allen, former president of the organization, to former employees, and they just said, we want everyone to come, we want to hash this thing out. Was it, they called it an investigation of toxic workplace and workplace harassment, but I don't know. I'm not really sure if that's exactly what it was. I think it was some form of grandstanding, but for yours and my sake, we got another level of transparency and another news story. So, then, right, allegations start coming out with respect to Dan Snyder being directly involved in some sexual assault allegations, more toxic workplace, cooking the books allegations, right, which we'll get into. But, that groundswell has then prompted the second report. We can talk about what those new allegations are, but the NFL felt the need after Congress kind of put this bright spotlight on their misgivings with respect to the report. And Goodell testified, so that's why the second report was prompted, because Congress stepped in, not because the NFL and the goodness and the kindness of their own heart thought to do it again. It's because Congress really made the NFL look bad with those investigations.
Yeah. And I can't remember. I know he's Ohio. Jim Gordon, I think
I think that's who it is.
I think so. And so he was asked, why is Portnoy not allowed at these NFL games? And, Roger Goodell said, I don't know. I'm not familiar with the situation. It's like, there's such a long list of incidences where exactly who this is. You can't claim that, he's just a one-off guy. Oh, yeah, well, I know of him. It's like, no, you know who Dave Portnoy is. You know exactly what you're doing. So
100%.
I don't know if he was under oth there or not, but I mean, that's such an obvious lie.
Yeah, then we had fun on our show about whether he could get hit with perjury charges for that. But, the truth is you got to, and we're going to talk a little bit, I'm sure, about the Al Michaels comments, the Jim Irsay comments, right? Roger Goodell was asked point blank, right? Are you going to remove Snyder as the owner? And he said he doesn't have the authority to do that, which yes and no. Certainly he could call for a vote. Certainly he could be pretty vocal, but, we go to a different sports saga about an owner being removed. The one that I think is pretty important in our sports law history books is Adam Silver stepping out, right? There's allegations of, racist remarks by Donald Sterling, former owner of the Clippers. So what does Silver do, right? He doesn't kick him out of the league because he needs the owner's approval to do that. He goes, I'm banning him for life. So there's certain things Roger Goodell could have sent a message for sure. He didn't want to, but it tells you that at that point in time, Goodell, Doug's, and I'm going to probably floor you with this. Goodell, I think, made like $100 million over the last 2 years. Guy makes a ton of money. He makes a ton of money to be a human shield. I'm not saying anything controversial, but if Goodell is going to go out and make a comment like ban for life, or I'm calling for the resignation of Snyder, he's going to have to do that knowing he's got the majority of owners behind him. So when he made those statements at Congress, my big takeaway is, as the lawyer watching this, I'm like, he doesn't have the votes. At this point in time, Goodell doesn't have it, or else he would be doing what his constituency, what the 32 owners or 31 here want him to do. So at least as of that time, now probably 6 months ago, he didn't have it. Now, the one point that you and I didn't mention, these financial improprieties. You ready to go down the rabbit hole?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
So here's a question I posed online the other day. Like, what's more likely, that these owners don't believe a word of these allegations and that they want him to continue being an owner, or they believe the allegations, or at least some of them, but they're just using their due diligence and they're being safe with respect to whatever dirt he has on them, or waiting for the investigation? Mm-hmm. I tend to think they believe it, or there's enough smoke, right? There's fire. Independent of the sexual assault with respect to Dan Snyder, the institutional control stuff, like the Penn State stuff, separate from these, messy workplace stuff and having no HR department and all that. There's a separate allegation that Dan Snyder, and with the help of the sales department or ticket department, was underreporting revenue that the Commanders received. And the allegation here, with respect to someone pretty high up in the ticket department, is that they were saying, well, they were like over-reporting music concerts and like Navy football games, and they were under-reporting ticket revenue. Why that's big? It's not just a sexual assault allegation, which by itself is very big, but now it's sexual assault plus stealing money from the owners. We've seen a lot of owners survive. Jerry Jones has allegations. Mark Cuban has his own allegations. Jim Irsay has allegations. I've never heard of an owner stealing money from other owners. That, in the wake of this whole thing, right, that one's unprecedented. And there's reports out there that owners care more about whether that's true than whether the sexual assault is. What I'm not saying is right or wrong, but that's very important. Those are three very big dominoes. Any one of them could derail Snyder if they're shown to be true.
Yeah, but when you put it all together, it amplifies it that much more. If you're going to steal from someone, you don't steal from a rich person. Like you don't. That is like, and I don't know if there's an old saying about that, but that was always that's always when stuff goes awry. That's when you get in trouble. Is the rich don't care if you're stealing from poor people or whatever. But as soon as you start stealing from other rich people, that's when it all comes down. And so it seems like that's what might be happening now.
100%. I'll do you one further, right? And I know people that are in the weeds of this know that Washington, right, major media market, their attendance, their revenue numbers do not resemble that of a major media market. They are woefully underperforming within the market. So now you have a lot of reports from owners, right? And the NFL is a system of revenue sharing. The owners make as much as the weakest team does. So keep that in mind. If you have Washington somehow, right, underperforming revenue year after year, Snyder's been at the helm for decades, right? That's money that owners are losing out on. So it's not just that there's bad allegations about Dan Snyder. It's a guy who's, not making them as much money as he should in that particular market. And on top of that, if you have an allegation that that's the guy that's also stealing money, right? Then it's a perfect storm. It came out in the last couple of days, right? Jerry Jones, people want to Google him. He's got his own stuff, right? Jerry Jones is the face of expanding the NFL. Jerry Jones is one of the most productive and highest value teams in the entire sport. Not that it's okay. I'm just pointing it out, right? It's how like Jerry Jones gets away with certain things and Dan Snyder can't get away with them. If the team was performing very well on the field or at the box office, it's a very different story. But Snyder's not doing a lot of positive things, and there's all this negative attention that harms the Shield as a whole. And that's why I think you've reached this groundswell with respect to now these owners meetings and owners now coming out. You have broadcasters coming out on an NFL broadcast, nonetheless, saying that Dan Snyder should sell the team. So we've reached a different level than we've been at the last, 2.5 years.
Yeah, there's definitely something to that. If you are making money for an entity, if you're an earner, you get away with things. Whether that's right or wrong, that is that's a standard rule. So yeah, and you mentioned it there. Irsay has come out. That's why we were going to record this, maybe next week or something. But the Irsay comments came out yesterday it seems there's two folds to this. So Jerry Jones, from my understanding, has kind of laid back and said, we'll see what's happening. And if Jerry Jones is saying that, it seems like this might just be another, under the rug kind of thing where nothing really comes from it. There's a lot of talk, a lot of promises of action, but nothing really, 10 years from now, we'll be having the same conversation. But then Irsay came out, who has his own issues from the past and everything, has said there is merit to removing him. And so not only for someone to come out and not say, let's wait for the investigation, but to actively, promote an action on it against another owner. I mean, that sounds pretty damning.
It's on a couple levels. It's you pointed out, it's interesting to come from Irsay of all people, right? People can Google Irsay. He has some, we'll say he was suspended from the league from some illicit substance. People can do their own Googling here. But the story in the middle of all of this, right? ESPN did a report that came out that Snyder has a dossier, right? And he's obviously refuted this, but he's saying that he's hired, private investigators to collect dirt on Roger Goodell and other NFL owners. And he's, the implication is that he's using this dirt to try to keep himself within the league. Hey, keep me in or else I'm going to release the dirt on you. So, of all people to come out and say, he's got to leave, right? He's, it's been 20 years. We're going to wait for the investigation, but it's heading down that track. For Irsay to say it, could say a lot more than some random owner like David Tepper, who's a big finance guy. He's a new owner. I'm not sure if there's anything bet on someone like Tepper, but that speaks, I think, some volumes, right? If Irsay comes out and he goes, yeah, essentially he's not saying this, but I'm going to say what I want to say, and I'm not afraid of you, Dan Snyder. That I think empowers, right, a lot of owners to speak out. We'll see. I do think that is an important step. And if we're trying to figure out timing, he speaks directly, right? Irsay was very candid, maybe even too candid. We'll see if he gets yelled at, see if he gets a letter in the mail from Goodell or something.
Yeah.
But
I read it before we started recording. I think Roger Goodell has already made a comment, and it wasn't a very damning comment on Irsay. So I think that leads to more of your point earlier. Goodell is pretty much just waiting for the owners to come around.
Right. Goodell, if you want to get a sense of what the owners are doing as a whole, right, and we should mention, in order to vote Dan Snyder out, people are asking, well, when's the next owners meeting? Don't worry, it's not once a year. The owners can call a particular meeting. They don't all have to convene in New York City where you and I are, right? They can do a phoner, right? They can just get everybody on the phone and run a vote. Once it gets to that point, they'll make the necessary moves, right? And it would be, in theory, a forced sale of the team. But right now we have that one, people are wondering what's the shoe to drop. The NFL is involved in this, Mary Jo White report that I'm calling it, for lack of a better term, like the do-over report. They're probably going to issue a written report. They're going to do all their due diligence. I have a sense that it's going to combine the financial impropriety stuff, with the sexual assault stuff, with the, institutional control stuff that came up at Congress that wasn't included in that first report. It's going to be everything. That report's gone on for 9 months now. And if it was a basic report, right, like I write reports for a living as an attorney, I imagine, right, the Goodell and the owners, they're paying for this. I imagine they're paying Mary Jo White. You don't just, put the attorney in a back closet and you don't speak to them for 9 months. As an attorney, you do quarterly reports, sometimes monthly reports. So the NFL is being fed information over and over. So I am trying to figure out, right, what changed between Goodell's comments to Congress and Jim Irsay's comments, right? In theory, not much. But, right, if the investigation is bearing some fruits and stuff is coming out, maybe that's what's changed. Maybe this investigation is bearing it out. So, yeah, I tend to think this investigation, it's very rare that the NFL will have 2 investigations into the same common nucleus and no written report for the first one. I'd be absolutely floored, shocked if there was not a full written report this time around, potentially a very scathing one.
Yeah, especially with Congress, the government stepping in and actually asking direct questions on it. Yeah, there's so much there that it would be difficult for them to not release a report a second time. But so we have the sexual assault allegations. We have the allegations of cooking the books, having apparently, allegedly, there were 2 separate ledgers, which in my mind, I don't know if you've seen Mel Brooks, The Producers. I just picture it. So there are literally 2 ledger books, show the NFL, never show the NFL. That's wild. And I can't remember his name, but apparently that was the VP of ticket sales.
It was. Yeah, I'll do you one further, Doug's. And listen, I told you I'm an encyclopedia here of all Snyderisms and Watsonisms, if we want to go down that rabbit hole at a second point. But the other one here, and which hasn't come up, if you can believe it, there's another investigation and a pretty big one. Snyder's been getting hit very hard from the owners for not fixing the stadium, right? I'm pretty sure this was where Jalen Hurts almost got crushed by the barriers once upon a time when he was leaving the field. That was at that stadium, right? The stadium needs an upgrade, and he can't get funding for a new stadium. He's having trouble getting public funds. So once upon a time, he had, the DMC area, the DMC, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia. He had everyone at the palm of his hand, where can we go? And now all of a sudden the tides have turned. They don't want to help him anymore because the constituents spoke up. Now, separately, in addition to all of this, there's a separate consumer fraud allegation with respect to tickets being taken off the market, we'll say not going directly to the consumers. So, yeah, that's why, the D.C. Attorney General is investigating Snyder. That's why he's not so easily getting a new stadium. And his inability to get a new stadium is keeping him in hot water with the owners. So, yeah, again, put on your tinfoil hat. You do your signs like Jersey Jerry. All of these things are connecting, and they're all pointing down at Snyder. He's got the weight of the world on him, and there's not much of a clear way out at this point.
Yeah, and I believe that. So that allegation was basically he was selling a lot of tickets to third-party vendors which limited the supply of tickets. And so anybody who wanted tickets had to pay higher prices.
Which, in theory, if true, right, that seems to be not helping the consumers. Another way you want to call it seems to be, something that should be looked into. But yeah, we'll say that there's a lot of pressure on Dan Snyder and no easy way out. Which some unintentional comedy in that big ESPN report. They said, well, another way to get out from under this is by trading for a premier quarterback, and then they trade for Carson Wentz, which no offense to PFT, by no means a premier quarterback.
Yeah. And so we can talk about that for a second here. So one of the outcomes of the initial investigation was the NFL, Roger Goodell, fined the team $10 million. And I guess they agreed that Dan Snyder would step away from day-to-day operations. Now, I read in multiple, I was doing a little research here. Sometimes they reference day-to-day operations for a time, and other people left that part out. So do you know exactly what it was? Was it an indefinite period?
So here's the thing, right? In the middle of all this, again, sports law bingo here, the Commanders changed their name. Dan Snyder was there for the announcement. For the most part, Tanya Snyder, his wife, has been the forward-facing person. When you don't have a written report, we don't know, right? So people are hearing it secondhand and thirdhand. We don't know, but if, I read that ESPN article closely. I know Snyder is still not at the owners' meetings. Tanya Snyder is the outward-facing individual in the organization. Is it day-to-day or, where are we in between here? The truth is, right, that we're talking about what's going to be encompassed within the NFL's investigation. Mary Jo White's maybe job just got the scope just got a little bit broadened. If Snyder was the guy behind, this Carson Wentz trade, which I know Ron Rivera very adamantly protests. He says that that was not the case. But if he was, it's a version of violation of probation, whatever you want to call it in the legal sense. Yeah. If you're told you get a restraining order, Doug's, and let's say you and Frank have a falling out and you get a restraining order to stay away from one another, and you go and you call up Frank, right, or you go to his house, it's a violation of the restraining order. There are certain punishments that come with it. We don't know, right, because there was no written report. If, Dan, for example, you violate the terms of your, I'm going to call it probation, what would happen? We don't know that. And that's why, the fact that there was no written report is troublesome, to say the least. But I think that's a separate part. I think we're on our 7th level of the investigation. That Mary Jo White, right, she's already taken 9 months. This could go more than a year. That's what the last one did. So I don't think we're getting a resolution so quick from the NFL. Yeah.
And so basically the thought is that the owners might want him out for various reasons, and even if nothing else, just all the negative publicity this has gotten. But we can go into the idea that, you mentioned earlier, they want a new stadium, but nobody in DC, nobody in Virginia, nobody in Maryland will, at least front any money for Dan Snyder to get a new stadium. Now, we talk about the cause of why an owner would be removed. And, there has to be cause. I think Irsay might say, the cause is because I hate him, from like The Office, Michael Scott, I do have cause. But even with everything else, is that potential, not just stealing money or saying, hey, we didn't earn enough money here, but could you see it potentially where owners could kick out an owner because of their inability to get a new stadium? That's, you're limiting the revenue that could be coming to them from through your franchise.
So this is my favorite question we get asked on this. So I host a show called Conduct Detrimental, which not coincidentally is the phrase by which owners, players, executives are held to, whether someone acts in a sense that it's conduct detrimental to the interest of the league. So here, right, could it be one incident? Sure. Deshaun Watson, right? That's kind of quantity, right? It's a lot of different allegations. Not one in particular looks pretty good, but there's a lot, right? He was judged under the conduct detrimental standard. Dan Snyder, right? The same type of deal. There is quantity and then there's quality, right? There's some teeth to these. There's a number of employees that are speaking out. It's almost kind of like, when you see it, right? Is Dan Snyder harming the interest of the Shield? You and I are talking about this right now. People are talking to lawyers and having lawyers on their shows. Like, I'm going on shows around the country to talk about what Dan Snyder is doing. Absent Dan Snyder, right? We're talking about football. We're talking about Sunday, like, Bill Belichick used to say. I think he still says it, but the team's not playing as well. So people are less concerned with him. But, that's the truth of it. I mean, Even in recent days, we've had the Tua stuff with the CTE protocol. That's not great for the league, but whose fault is that, right? That's just an NFL general problem. We're not pointed at one particular person. But here, Snyder is the easy fall guy because, right, these are all tied to one organization out of 32. I think if it was just the revenue, I don't think they would kick him out of the league. I think that would be a very weird precedent to set. And I'll give you one step further. Lawyers, what we do in a very easy, simplified version, we look at history and we try to draw precedent based on similar events, and we try to predict the future based on what has transpired. So, very famous quote, at least in our sports law circles, again, Donald Sterling, right, was recorded in the privacy of his own home saying something very inappropriate to another individual, racist comment.
It was a private conversation.
But doesn't excuse what was said in the conversation. But, for purpose of the story, Mark Cuban was quoted at the time. This is now a couple of years ago. He kind of said, well, and he didn't say which way or not he was going to vote, and they never got to it. But he said, do we want to set a precedent? I'm paraphrasing, set a precedent of kicking someone out of the league based on something they said in the privacy of their own home? What kind of precedent would that set for other owners? So it's a small fraternity, right? There's 32 NFL teams. These things are hard to get by. And that's why the story of Dan Snyder digging up dirt on people, I think, has raised some cause for concern. So Snyder, right, he has his own sexual assault allegations, and there's alleged $1.25 million payout to a particular individual. We'll call that one skeleton in a closet. Jerry Jones has his stuff, right? Jim Irsay has his stuff. Even Bob Kraft, he can dig up the old stuff with the massage stuff, right? All those things are out there. And I'm sure much more is known to NFL owners than you or I or the football public know. Things are said at owners' meetings that you and I will never find out. But if you have one guy threatening to break ranks and going scorched earth, right? How much is that worth, right? Is that worth just keeping the guy in the league? And that's I think, the question here. Do I think there is, if all of these allegations are shown to be true, is there enough to kick him out and get, is it warranting of a vote? Sure. If you got, 24 of 32 voters to vote him out based off of all those things to be true, sure. But I'm still hesitant, right? I'm still hesitant that these owners are just going to say, let's kick Snyder out and let's trust him to keep the lid on all the stuff that that he's acquired over the years. I think that's the fear, truly, from the NFL standpoint.
Yeah, and so to go with that, so there's two things with that. Dan Snyder, or at least somebody representing Snyder, released a statement to the other NFL owners saying that report is bogus. I would never dig up dirt on other owners. I would never try and do that. He said, that was just a claim made to try and, slander his name, which that's a hard defense, right? If your defense is, they're just trying to, slander my name. Well, you've already slandered your name. That's not really a great defense. But then also, he doesn't need to get dirt on 24 different owners. He only needs dirt on 8 owners. He only needs that. That's the minimum number. But yeah, we'll see.
Well, I mean, let's go one step further, right? You guys have a pretty, we'll say a core group at Barstool, right? So let's say somebody had dirt on Frank. They didn't, have dirt on you, right? You might be inclined to help Frank out, and let's see how many friends people have within that space. So that's the tricky part here. And again, to precedent, right? If someone's going to get the beans spilled on them, what comes as a result of it? So obviously, if we're trying to go down the legal weeds, right? Like, could someone sue Dan Snyder for defamation, which is a question I get asked a lot, right? In truth, right? Like, if someone is telling the truth and it's just a story that nobody knew about, the truth is an absolute defense to defamation. So people are saying, is what Dan Snyder is doing, is it extortion? It's not quite there. And again, he's denying all of this, just so everyone's clear. But if, in theory, someone was accused of doing something criminal, for example, and Dan Snyder went to them or his representatives, because he has lawyers that are on retainer for like $500,000 a month. Don't worry, I'm not nearly that expensive. But he's got these lawyers that in theory could go to someone and say, hey, we're going to report this to the authorities unless you vote in favor of Dan Snyder. If that were to happen, that is very close to tried and true extortion. So that's why Snyder is out here on the bandwagon saying, I don't have dirt. Don't worry, none of this is true. He sent an owner to a letter to NFL owners this past week. But yeah, I mean, you certainly, right? If the Dan Snyder is the version of Dan Snyder that's being reported on the congressional hearings and the ESPN article, if that version of Dan Snyder exists, you certainly can't rule that out in a very desperate bag of tricks.
let's say he is removed, or, at least it comes up to an owner's vote and they vote to remove him. Obviously, like I said earlier, from just an entertainment standpoint, I would love to see the drama unfold and everything. And I want to see from the legal aspect how that would pan out, because we've never seen it before. I would love to, I don't know if it's, in real estate, they call it specific performance, where it's like you have to sell, I don't know if that's the same thing or not. But I would love to see just how that pans out. But you mentioned earlier, for a regular person, if you told them, hey, sell this team and you'll get $5 billion, that sounds like a good deal. But we're not talking about a regular person. We're talking about a billionaire. And when you're in that group of billionaires, money is no longer really an issue. It's status, and it's, what do you own? And so if you're a billionaire, it's not just, oh, you're a billionaire. No, you're a billionaire and you own one of only 32 NFL teams. That is your toy. That is your status symbol. And so even Mark Cuban went on, I think it was Bill Simmons years ago, and he said, well, what if somebody offered you like this is years ago. What if somebody offered you 1.4 billion? And Mark Cuban said, no, I wouldn't sell. And he said, okay, well, what if somebody offered you 3 billion? And Mark Cuban said, no, I wouldn't. And Bill Simmons was flabbergasted, but it's like, you wouldn't sell your team for 3 billion. He goes, what would I do with $3 billion?
Right.
And so that's where I don't think, I would love to see this go further, because it is Daniel Snyder, who people only know him because he is the Washington football team owner. So is he willing to give that up?
Yeah. And it's funny. You said something which I'll alert people to the potential for this. And I've spoke to my people that were at the owners meetings that I'm trying to figure out the actual mechanism, right? You force him to sell. Okay. You and I, I'm sure, would have a lot of fun, a lot of content on Barstool and our show. Like, he's forced to sell. Okay. Then what happens, right? Now it gets a little dicey, because, in a past life, I don't really do divorce work anymore, but I've been around the block. I've seen a few things. You sometimes, right, the marital home has to be sold, or a car has to be sold, or, a picture the husband and wife bought together. And there's a fear, right? Like, okay, it's not just, you don't bring the picture to court with you. There's a process of like, you got to go home, you got to give it, you got to put it in escrow, you got to, give it to the bank. So it wouldn't be the first time in the history where someone was required to sell something, and maybe, right, someone felt the, we'll say the incentive to trash the place on the way out, right? Like, I'm not going to rule it out. Again, if the Dan Snyder is to be believed, the one that's talked about in congressional circles, in this ESPN article, that he's this horrendous person, he has this, this dossier of dirt on all these people. That's what the allegations are. Like, would it shock me if Dan went away kicking and screaming and pouting and, ruining the facility, right? Like, that's the element of drama that, we've never seen an owner be put to a vote, let alone voted out. And obviously, without those two, we've never seen a voter owned it, an owner voted out of the league. So yeah, that's, there's a lot of unintentional, intrigue in that. And we'll see. But the truth is, Doug, to your point, people like, who's going to want the dumpster fire that is the Commanders? It's a major media market, right? We've seen teams turn around in a much quicker time. Like, you could even talk, going back to college sports, you can talk about Tennessee. The organization's been turned around in 2 years with the on-the-field product. And that's in a sport, right? That's doesn't have the draft, doesn't have an automatic, talent suck, like college does when you graduate, guys. So could someone turn around the program very quickly and, cash in on a very big investment? The Broncos sold for like $4.5 billion. Washington is just as good, if not a better market than Denver. It would very much surprise me if it did not fetch a record number in NFL circles.
There's a lot to this, and I'm sure there's a lot more to come.
Yeah, certainly we're staying vigilant on the front. I don't think Congress is necessarily done, but yeah, and there's some other dominoes with respect to the Gruden stuff, to the Brian Flores stuff. Even the Stephen Ross stuff over in Miami. This touches a lot of organizations. So this is a very big domino we're waiting to drop here.
Yeah. And so, again, I'm coming at it from the sidelines. Is there anything that I missed, or is there any questions that I should be asking, anything that we should talk about that adds a little bit more detail?
Well, I'll leave you with this, right? I think this is an important one. We're going to get, I think, a written report. I feel pretty confident in that. The Stephen Ross stuff with respect to Miami Dolphins, if people want to get the sense of what the report will look like, I think it'll look something like that. We don't get fully into the weeds. We don't get texts and emails and stuff like that, but we get a summary of what the NFL found. Now, a case that we, I think should be on people's radars. The John Gruden case was a case, he's suing the NFL for the alleged leaking of emails to New York Times and different outlets, right? The question is, with respect to John Gruden, will that case remain in a courtroom, or will it go to a private arbitration that we will never see the light of day? A judge recently ruled in Vegas that is going to be conducted in the courtroom. So, in the last year, we've had some really big cases. So the Johnny Depp case with, public, testimony and whatnot. Even the congressional hearing with Roger Goodell, everybody tuned into that. We could see a world. John Gruden is let's just say the NFL's got a lot of reasons to be worrisome, not of necessarily losing the case. It's not that much money to them. It's tens of millions. But with John Gruden putting a spotlight on the NFL, because what is he doing? He wants to figure out the conversations that occurred on why these emails were released. He wants to, in theory, Gruden's out of the league. He has, he can, burn the bridge at this point. So Gruden is trying to expose what went on behind the scenes. And just like we're talking about Dan Snyder trying to bring up dirt on other people, Gruden, right? If you want to read his complaint and the comments by his lawyer, I think that's in theory, right? Like, why is only John Gruden and John Gruden alone the only fall guy with respect to this Washington thing? So yeah, I'm watching that very closely. That's going to proceed through discovery. We could have depositions, just like, they made their way out with respect to, the Barstool case once upon a time with Michael Rappaport. We all watched those fun depositions. You could certainly see some interesting depositions with Gruden that would never in a million years come out with respect to the NFL's investigation. They're not going to put their owners on the stand to testify, but in Gruden with non-party subpoenas and maybe even a trial, that very much could be on full display for you and I and the football audience to see. So even if and when Snyder is kicked out, we'll see if it happens. The Gruden thing is lurking in the background, and that's a case that it's probably got another year or two before it really reaches its full ending. But if it doesn't settle, that's a case that has the real potential to reveal some other skeletons that are potentially floating out there.
Yeah, and we talked about this before. So with the Gruden emails and everything, there's a thought out there that the Gruden emails were kind of a diversion, possibly by Snyder, possibly by the NFL. Hey, we don't want anybody to look further into this Commanders issue. So here's some John Gruden emails from like 7 years ago. Go study or go look at that. Even if that is the case, they have to realize like there's still going to be people looking into them like that. Okay, thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will address this on top of what we are already looking at. So, I mean, do you have any inkling of like who or how those emails even came out? Do we know that?
So, the conspiracy theorists here are, I think there's three people, and we can get into the buckets, but these emails are alleged to have come from the Washington investigation. When the lawyer was looking into the team, they were looking through different emails. And my understanding of the situation is that they ran certain keywords for inappropriate terms. And, John Gruden, who was not working for the organization, he was working for ESPN at the time, was emailing Washington employees. And, these emails, I guess, came up in a flagged search. So, here's one person that had access to the emails, the lawyer investigating the Washington investigation. Okay, that's one bucket. Reportedly, those emails were provided by that attorney to the NFL because they wanted to divulge what they found. It wasn't really relating to Washington, but it's still something important. And then number three, who else had the emails? Washington, right? Because it was on their servers. In theory, they've been in possession of it for many, many years. Separate question, which is above your and my pay grade. Why no one ever reported this at Washington or anybody for years, or different people on the emails not reporting Gruden's comments? Separate story. But who leaked the emails, right? Was it the attorney investigating them? Was it Washington? Was it the NFL? Somebody else? The theory, I don't know if it's necessarily a good theory, but the theory is that these were leaked to get the scent off of the Washington Commanders. That, hey, let's pay attention over to Gruden. He's a coach. He's not an owner. Let's throw him under the bus. People will stop worrying about us. I see it. I've seen that theory a lot. I'm not sure I personally buy it because then, people like you and I have questions, right? Like, who else was getting those emails, right? Were people responding to the emails with their own type of racial comments? Like, why haven't you and I seen those emails? Those emails, right? The actual text of those emails, that's very much relevant to the John Gruden case. So you could very quickly see, you could trace, right, who was the NFL in theory maybe trying to protect by redacting every name on those emails. Whoever leaked these to the different outlets, every name is really redacted except for Gruden's, which is odd. So who was trying to be protected? All those questions. I see the theory that it was done to try to get the attention off of Washington, but you and I just spent a ton of time talking about all the attention on Washington. So if that was the theory, kind of unsuccessful, obviously.
I don't use that kind of language. I'm not around people that use the kind of language. You mentioned that, Gruden's name was the only one that wasn't redacted. It might be a bad assumption, but I assume if he's using that language in emails, that other people are at least, okay with it, if not using the same language.
Let's go with that for a second. Where what essentially is being accused in public sphere is that the NFL is a racist organization if that person is making those type of comments within circles. So, so some people might ask that are not as familiar with the space. Well, is the NFL getting sued for racial discrimination? Short answer is yes. We can go down another rabbit of sports hole. That's Brian Flores alleging that the NFL is a racist endeavor. It's a class action lawsuit involving other potential NFL coaches that have their own allegations. But yeah, the John Gruden case and those emails is directly referenced by Brian Flores. And he's saying these are the conversations that occurred. So I would be very surprised, right? If you don't get those emails to the John Gruden case, if you're alleging that the NFL is a racist endeavor and, the Rooney Rule is being operated in a racist type way, maybe we should see some emails, right, that include those type of terms. And if there's nothing there, right, this is the point that we make on our show. If there's nothing to hide, right, why not be fully transparent? But the NFL's kind of caginess with this, right? The fact that only one name is redacted, right, or unredacted, tells you that they might be worried about what's under the hood. The NFL is a private organization. They are not some type of public, like a public school that has to respond to FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests. The NFL only has to release this to the extent that they choose to, or a court kind of compels them to. We haven't reached that point in the Gruden case or the Flores case, but what's relevant in discovery is what's relevant to the underlying cause of action. Gruden is who leaked the emails. Certainly, the emails are really relevant. Brian Flores is alleging that the owners are racist, and all 32 NFL teams are named in that. For a racial discrimination case, those emails are relevant there. So yeah, we'll find out. If those cases progress. And to the extent that material gets released to the public, we'll find out very quickly why these investigations have taken so long and what due diligence and what kind of quality controls the NFL is trying to put in place to prevent them from coming out, we'll say. This is an interesting time for sports law. So many of these stories intersect, and we're really seeing a changing of the guard on how and to what extent owners will be protected. And again, just as you and I just talked about, right? Pot of gold at the other end of the rainbow. So not a surprise to me that Sarver took his check and walked away from the Phoenix Suns. I think at some point that's going to be the decision that Dan Snyder is going to have to make. But we'll see. We'll see when that happens.
We will see. Well, yeah, that's a lot to take in. I really appreciate you coming on, Dan, and explaining to us in detail from an actual law perspective. It's everybody's a lawyer on Twitter, so it's nice to actually talk to a real lawyer who happens to be on Twitter at Sports Law Lust. And you also have your own podcast. You mentioned it a couple of times here. Conduct Detrimental.
Conduct Detrimental. We stole it from Ohio State, but we say the Sports Law Podcast. So not that many sports law podcasts, but we're the one. So easier way to look it up.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on. And hopefully we'll maybe start the series and hopefully we'll have more information on all the Dan Snyder stuff soon. It sounded like we said, we were going to record this next week. We decided to do it today. It sounds like that might be something that's happening sooner rather than later. Well, if we have updates on it, I'm on top of it. So always happy to join you back here. And you throw up the bat signal. I'll know where to find you. I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.